Genesis chapter 3, we find the story of Adam and Eve being confronted by God as God walks through the garden looking for them. This is after Adam and Eve have eaten of the tree that God told them not to eat of. The book of Genesis chapter 3, and we'll begin in verse 8, has these words. They heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden, and at the time it was the evening breeze. And Adam and Eve hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God among the trees of the garden. But the Lord God called to Adam and said to him, "Where are you?" Adam said, "I heard the sound of you in the garden, Lord, and I was afraid, and I hid." It's an amazing story that we read in the book of Genesis. It's the story of the interaction between God and Adam and Eve found in this book. It is the story of a God who wants to travel on life's journey with us and who desires along the journey to make that journey a bit more bearable, if you will. A God who desires to be our companion. It is the story of one who has come not so much to make the journey less difficult or less painful, but certainly to make it more fulfilling and in some ways, certainly, a more nurturing and sustaining life. Adam and Eve knew what it was like to walk with God in the evening breeze in the garden, to have communion and fellowship with God every single day. God was indeed among them in the garden, and together the three shared a relationship that enriched their lives beautifully. But this day, as God walked in the garden in the cool of the day, something was amiss. Adam and Eve were conspicuously quiet and out of sight as God walked through the garden this particular day. But God, who knows all things, and who in God's own way was aware of what was taking place, called out to Adam. And he said, "Adam, where are you?" Now, we know the story. Earlier, Adam and Eve had been enticed by the cunning and the charming wit of the serpent to eat the fruit of which God had said not to eat. But convinced by the argument of the serpent and believing the fruit to be not only good, but also desirable, they both decided to taste the fruit. Their lives would never be the same from that moment on. Adam and Eve became acutely aware of what they had done. They became aware of their vulnerability to each other, and they became aware of their own guilt and shame. I can imagine that up to this point, Adam and Eve looked forward to that walk in the garden with God every day. I can imagine that perhaps that walk was the highlight of their day, to join with God on a journey through the garden. And I can imagine that never before had God had to call out to Adam or Eve, "Where are you?" Since that time, however, God has been calling out to God's creation, to people like you and me. Where are you? You see, while things in the garden will soon change as we continue to read the story, there are some things that have not changed. And one of those is the simple fact that God still desires to walk with you and to walk with me in the daily journey of our lives. It's the fact that God longs to spend time with us and be with us. And yet, more often than not, I expect God is calling out, "Where are you?" each day to people like you and me. Where are you? I think it's a good question to ask. It points out that the one who takes the initiative, God has always taken the initiative, simply desires to be with you and me. The question reveals quite a bit. It reveals that God has the desire and God has the will to be with us. But the question rings out through the ages down to today, to you and me. Where are you? Maybe it is time to begin to think of how you and I will answer that question. Adam answered that question when he heard the voice of God. And he said to God, I heard you in the garden. I was afraid, so I hid. I wonder if we were to hear God asking us that question today, how might we answer? Frederick Buechner, one of my favorite authors, has written, whether you call on God or don't call on God, God will be present with you. I think that's what we can learn. And I think that's good news for us. If we think about that question, where is God? It is good to know that God is with us. Even when we are like Adam and we want to hide from God. So take the time today and hear God asking you. And then respond to God, perhaps by saying, here I am. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this devotional. I pray that it's meaningful to you in some manner. And let me ask you to join with us in Sunday worship and in Christian education on Sunday morning at Emmanuel Baptist Church. I think you'll find, like I have found, that Emmanuel Baptist Church is a wonderful church filled with wonderful people who simply desire to walk with God. I invite you to join us.